Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 12, The Birth of Emperor Parikshit, text number 19. That's where we're at today. Hey, Brihat.
Hi.
Okay, so we're carrying on through the holidays here and getting up somewhat early, despite having holiday celebrations yesterday. And I don't know, my brain is perhaps not quite as fully functional as usual. I had a bit of a late night last night, but
It's also the cold.
yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's definitely.
We're getting minus I think minus tonight minus 30.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Okay, well, we hit I think -5 or something in Vancouver, and then we were sitting around talking about how cold it was, and we have a friend visiting from Winnipeg, Brenda.
yeah. Oh,
She was like, "What's going on?" These people are worried about -5.
it gets like
Winnipeg.
minus 50 in Winnipeg.
Yeah. It's that verse, Matras Parshastu Kuntaya, Sitoshna Sukha Dukada, Agama Paino Nityastam Satiksha Shabharata. That how's that verse go? When I said
Says
taller,
it just
yeah, it
says
just says,
winter and summer seasons come and go.
yeah,
Happiness and distress comes and goes like the winter and summer seasons, and one should learn to tolerate them.
yeah, without being disturbed. That's where we're at. Okay, so this chapter is talking about Parikshit, this emperor who took birth. We've already just talked about the difficulty it was a difficult birthing of Parikshit Maharaj, but not due to the natural circumstance, but because Ashwatthama tried to kill the child in the womb of his mother Uttara. Now he's been born. We went through that whole situation. He was saved by Krishna, and now that he's been born, they're celebrating his birth, and the Brahmanas are describing his qualities because Yudhisthira asked the Brahmanas what kind of personality Parikshit would be. And they were expert at astrology and what's that?
Physio- physiognomy,
Physiognomy?
or yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Being able to look at the bodily features of the child and putting it all together, they could read, because our they're like, if you know how to do it, there's a lot that can be read, just about, there's a lot about us that is described in our bodily features, that if we have an eye for it and the knowledge, it does talk about it. They kind of mirror the qualities that are within. And there's a whole science behind that, and astrology is also connected to that as well. So it turns out he's a pretty awesome guy. Maharaj Parikshit, this emperor to be, and they're now going to describe all his qualities.
Yeah, and compare them to the qualities of other great historical personalities. Yeah, and there's quite a few verses. So it delineates one of his qualities, and then usually, I think in most cases, connects it to another great personality who displayed those qualities. And then in the commentaries, there's a lot of the stories behind those other personalities and how they displayed the quality that's being mentioned in the verses.
Yeah, so this will be fun to kind of
Yeah.
go into these different qualities and then have there's some pretty cool stories here.
I'd also like to mention that Yudhisthira, who's the grandfather, he's um, anxious to hear, because as he was the king And as the king, he was anxious that the next the heir to the throne, who Bricket Myers is the only one left, anxious that he be, like qualified to lead the people in the right way. And so he's anxious to hear what the child's going to be like, if he's going to be qualified, and if he's going to lead people on the dharmic path. So
And if,
I think he's not disappointed.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And they're getting older also, the Yudhisthira and his brothers, and they want to actually like leave the kingdom, renounce the kingdom, and go and focus on spiritual realization, because that was the tradition and of the kings of those times. At a certain point, when they were getting older, they would just leave everything and go to the forest and and just focus on self-realization. So
Hmm.
he's wondering if now's the time, if he's able to leave the kingdom in a good in good hands.
I'm just flipping ahead to see what chapter that is. We're going to read about how they do that in chapter
It,
15.
it's not the next one. Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
Chapter 15. The next one is also an interesting chapter, but Dhritarashtra. Okay, so let's dive in. 19. The learned Brahmanas said, O son of Pritha, that would be Yudhisthira, this child shall be exactly like King Ikshvaku, son of Manu, in maintaining all those who are born. And as for following the Brahminical principles, especially in being true to his promise, he shall be exactly like Ram, the personality of Godhead, the son of Maharaj Dasarat. This term, the personality of Godhead, is becomes important as we get into different descriptions, because the avatars, it's pointing to how these avatars are divine.
Mhm,
They come
mhm,
from like a fountainhead, you could say, like there's water comes forth from a fountain, and so it looks like there's like water all over the place, but then it's got a source. It's got the head of the fountain. So
mhm,
instead of saying the fountainhead, it's like the Godhead. So all of these avatars, they come from a source.
mhm.
So Ram is one of those.
And he's Ram is very famous in India. The rule of Ram is like very famous in India. The if you In India, they still today, there's this sentiment that they want to have, they call it Ram Raj, the ruling of Ram in India. They want to have that. Uh, uh, yeah, the war, or the India at that time was like at its best, and so they're very attached to Ram.
Do you want to read about Ram? See what
Sure.
what it's all about?
So, okay, Ram incarnated him. Yeah. So he was the son of Maharaj Dashrath, the king of Ayodhya. Ram descended along with his plenary portions, and all of them appeared as his younger brothers. In the month of Chaitra, on the 9th day of the growing moon in the Treta Yuga, as he appeared as usual to establish the principles of Dharma and to annihilate the disturbing elements. When he was just a young boy, he helped the great sage Vishvamitra to by killing Subahu and striking Maricha, the she demon, who is disturbing the sages in their daily discharge of duties. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas are meant to cooperate for the welfare of the mass of people. The Brahmin sages endeavor to enlighten the people by perfect knowledge, and the Kshatriyas are meant for their protection. Ramachandra is the ideal king for maintaining and protecting the highest culture of humanity, known as Brahmanya Dharma. The Lord Ram is specifically the protector of the cows and the Brahmins, and hence he enhances the prosperity of the world. He rewarded the administrative demigods by effective weapons to conquer the demons through the agency of Ishvamitra, who is present in the bow sacrifice of King Janaka, and by breaking the invincible bow of Shiva, he married Sita Devi, daughter of Maharaj Janaka.
Let's pause there for a sec. There's another paragraph, but there was a important point here about how the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas are meant to cooperate for the welfare of the mass of people. And then the examples that were given there were how Ram came and took care of these evil personalities, Subahu and Maricha. And because Vishwamitra and the sages, they would live. So how I understand it was that there'd be a kingdom where the king would live and the citizens would live. It would be the like city, and but the city would have the boundary of the kingdom would extend beyond the city into like the forests or whatever. And so like for it was also the king's responsibility to protect like the sages in the forest. These sages and brahmanas, they didn't live in the cities. They lived, many of them lived on the outskirts of cities, kind of like not suburbs, not like that, but like really kind of detached from the urban life of the time, and living very simply in the forest. But the kings were responsible for protecting them so that they could live peacefully there, even though they weren't living in the cities. And so, but these sages were like super powerful. And so these personalities, Subahu and Maricha, they were mystical beings. This is all in the Ramayana, right? Like these pastimes that took place with Ram, and they were like causing a lot of grief to the sages, and who were just trying to live a simple life and focus on the divine, and just carrying out their spiritual practices daily. But these beings would take pleasure in coming there and disturbing the sages and then attacking them in different ways. And the sages were actually powerful enough to to take care of the demons, but it wasn't their duty.
Yeah.
So they would, even though they had great mystic power, and just through mantra could dispose of these evil creatures. And that, because there are examples when sometimes they do that out of necessity, but like as long as there's a kshatriya that's present, they would just go to the kshatriya, the warrior, and explain the situation and let the warrior deal with it, not themselves. Isn't that an interesting dynamic? I don't really know what to say about that. It's just I find it interesting. They have the power to do it, but they don't. There's some kind of like renunciation in that, right? There's some kind of really good quality in that.
Well, yeah, and they're by nature they're non one of the qualities of the that culture, the culture of the sages, is non-violence.
Yeah.
So they don't get involved in that, and you can see that the descriptions in the Bhagavatam, some of the battles that take place, they take quite a long time, and the sages just don't have time for stuff like that.
Yeah, right. They'd rather do other stuff, right?
So
It's not their mood at all.
it's not their
Yeah.
mood, and also I don't know if it says here, I remember in other places, like their whole lives are dedicated to Srila Prabhupada says here, educating uh, enlightening the people by perfect knowledge. So that's like that's their duty, and that in itself is a full-time, you know, full-time occupation. So they don't necessarily have time to deal with, some of these other things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They don't want to take the time to
And then they have the freedom to fully demonstrate other qualities.
yeah,
You ever see that movie Schindler's List?
yeah, yeah.
There's one part of it. I mean, I saw that movie years ago, but just as a part of it just coming to my mind right now, where um, this guy, I can't even remember who the main character was. I guess was it Schindler? Anyway, there's this tyrant, in the concentration camp who's just killing people randomly because of he gets, he feels upset by someone in a particular way and he'll shoot him or something. So Schindler or whoever the main character was says to him, real power isn't just using power. Real power is not using power when you have the ability to, or not killing somebody even though you have the ability to kill somebody. And so there's a little chunk of the movie where this tyrant in like who's running the concentration camp considers that and restrains from killing people because he thinks he's exerting a higher power.
Mm.
And it works. You see him like he chooses not to kill somebody because he's thinking about this thing that he's
Mm-hmm.
been told, right? But he can't maintain it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. It's like, and that's a quality like that's quite remarkable. Like if somebody has the power to do something like that, like in this case, they have the sages have a lot of power, but they're not eager to use it, which is like
Mm-hmm.
a great contrast to the reality that we live in today, right? Like we're like people are quite eager to, we are quite eager to attain positions of power and exert that power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, to bring it back to Parikit, he does have the power. He will have the power, and he will be the right person to use the power.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and he would fall into the category of the kshatriya, the ruling class, the administrative class. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's their duty, is to um, protect the intellectual class, or the sages, so that they can do their duty of protecting it. I'll tell you, I'll just say that, like, one person can't do everything.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't like work that way. Like I'm just based on where we live, like there's a lot of different elements to life here to like maintain life, because like we don't, we take care of our own water, we plow our own roads with the snow, like we do everything, like in terms of infrastructure and like and so, but and obviously we have a bit of community, but you can't do everything. You just can't. One person can't. And so society develops and progresses when everybody's cooperating and contributing in the way that they can. And so, um, and that makes, that makes things really work and really happen.
Mm-hmm. And then you're like free to, people are free to do what they do best when everyone's working in harmony.
Yes. And I would also like to say, um, this word cooperate is mentioned here, and the cooperation, the goal of the cooperation is for the enlightenment of the mass of people. Um, so spiritual enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas today there's also some kind of, obviously, cooperation going on in society, but the goal is not necessarily for the enlightenment of
Mm-hmm.
the mass of people. It's for the
Economic development.
generation of revenue.
Yes, totally. Yeah, yeah. The world has got a consensus that that's what we should cooperate for. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, what a
yeah,
shift. Somewhere along the way it shifted.
yeah. So
I
that's, yeah. When the word here is, like it said that Parikit Marsh, he'll be a protector of Brahminical culture, just like Ram was.
Mm,
And that's what Brahminical culture is it's the culture of spiritual enlightenment. That becomes the goal of society. But
yeah.
when you have the culture of the business class, then it becomes the culture of making profit,
Hmm.
and that's what we see today.
So should we move on to the next one?
Sure. This child will be a munificent donor of charity and protector of the surrendered, like the famous king Shibi of the Ushinara country, and he will expand the name and fame of his family, like Bharat, the son of Maharaj Dushyanta. I'm guessing at that time, like when people would hear all these names, like everybody knew who
Yeah.
they were talking about.
But because we don't, Prabhupada has elaborated in the commentary a little bit who these
Yeah,
people are. Both of these personalities are worth pausing on. So the qualities that are being focused on here is that he'll be munificent in his charity, and he will be a protector of the surrendered. So, um, and then
right.
we've got some examples about what that looks like.
Okay, so we're gonna read this commentary.
Yeah, let's see where Yayati starts. It's like these are quite long. Yeah, go for it. Start right from the beginning. This will take us right into
Yeah.
King Shibi.
A king becomes famous by his acts of charity, performances of sacrifices, protection of the surrendered, etc. A Kshatriya king is proud to give protection to the surrendered souls. This attitude of a king is called Ishvarabhava, or factual power to give protection in a righteous cause. I'm just going to pause there for a second because
Yeah.
there's the Mahabharata, which is one of the great epics of India. Um, there's an example in there that just stuck in my mind. This one king, his kingdom, these other kings, they come and they attack him, and when he finds out that they're attacking him, he just like he like steps off his throne, and he just like roars in happiness and like jumps on his chariot and like goes and goes out to fight in the battle. And which I don't know, I just like I've never met a person like that that's just like when he's got the opportunity to like fight to protect his people, he's just like, oh, this is the this is the juice of life. It's like,
Yeah.
ah.
It's
Yeah,
it's hard to conceive of, eh? It's a personality type. And I
yeah.
guess maybe it becomes like what's the word? Like when you make a caricature of something.
Hmm.
So there's caricatures of this personality type in like movies and things like that.
Right.
They may not actually capture the whole personality of what's being addressed because it's a very powerful but very spiritual um, mix of qualities. And the whole point of protection is the joy in kind of like helping people progress in life,
Yeah,
and the sense of like being able of the opportunity to fulfill one's nature, one's natural duty.
yeah,
Just like if a musician, for example, may really feel like exaltation at an opportunity to like perform their best
hmm,
in
hmm,
some way, right?
hmm.
It's like that, but it's a warrior. The warrior is just feeling this great word. Did you say exaltation, or he roared in enthusiasm, right?
Yeah, he was like just so happy, just
And
so happy.
when you read the Mahabharata, especially the battle scenes, I mean, it's
Right.
kind of like over the top, like the behavior and the reactions of these warriors as they're engaging in warfare, they're really kind of like enthusiastic and like,
Yeah, yeah.
you
And
know,
the yeah, it says here that they for a righteous cause, like for them to even to like die on the battlefield,
mm-hmm.
but for the right cause, like there's many descriptions like they would prefer to do that than to stay home and avoid the
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of fun it's certainly fun to read about and to discuss, but the what's the like the point behind it, or there's a significant thing here is that imagine if that was the leader,
right, right,
and the leader had that much, I don't know, these qualities, of how that would trickle down into the
right.
society,
Yeah,
and what how people would feel about such a leader,
yeah,
and how like, yeah,
yeah, it's totally inspiring.
yeah,
It's totally inspiring. That's a principle that Krishna mentions in the Gita, that what great people personalities do, the rest of the people in general generally they follow what
mm-hmm.
great person. And so if you see like the leader is like, he's ready to protect, the path of dharma, the right, then it's like, okay, like we have to follow that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's imbibed by the people.
yeah.
And it's just such a contrast to the modern situation, right? Because like, everybody knows that our leaders, our politicians, are like, what to speak of standing for qualities. I mean, I don't think anyone really believes they're very even thoroughly honest. There might be some rare exceptions to that, but most of the kind of like leadership we have to deal with is appalling, actually.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
how does that trickle down into society? Like, how do
Yeah,
people feel
right,
about that, and what kind of, what opportunities to imbibe, what qualities do we have the opportunity to exemplify, or
right.
to experience from our leaders? Anyway, the point is that it matters. It has like, real time impact on society, and so therefore, when we're reading about these things, sometimes it's hard to imagine like how this is relevant to society, because we don't have a society that's formulated in this way.
Right, right.
But it's possible. It's possible because even though this was an ancient time, it's based on the development of qualities, and that's why Yudhisthira at the beginning, he's asking the sages
Right.
about what are the qualities of this person going to be. He's not asking about, other things. He's specifically concerned about what the qualities of this future leader are going to be, and so those qualities are we can like those qualities can be cultivated today.
Yeah. And that's like that principle is there, that society in general takes on you know, we take on the qualities of, the leading people in society. And so, now economic development is it's kind of like the one of the main values of our society, because that's what the people who have power, that's their value. And so the people in general, so that principle is still there.
Mm-hmm.
We imbibe that. But when we read the Bhagavatam, that's what we're hearing about. We're hearing about these great personalities. And so the Bhagavatam is meant to create that kind of is that the phrase Prabhupada used in another place? It's meant for a cultural revolution.
Yeah.
It's a cultural revolution to inspire us by reading about such great personalities, to inspire us to go in back into a different
Yeah,
direction. Yeah.
Yeah, this could be culturally revolutionary if people would adopt these practices. Yeah, Prabhupada says a spiritual, no, what was it? Cultural revolution for the re-spiritualization of the
Yeah,
entire society.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like you, like when you read these things about great personalities, I've always found, like, I did a lot of reading when I was growing up, like it's inspiring. Like I remember, and even like, movies, like watching, I remember reading and watching like Lord of the Rings. Like there's a lot of like depth of character and integrity to the characters in those stories, and it's inspiring. It's like, oh yeah, that's, it feels like that's the right thing. I want to be more like that.
Mhm.
And so that's what the Bhagavatam is full of.
So we've looked at first was protection. So we talked about how like there's this quality of being a protector,
Mhm.
and we talked now the next one is munificent in charity. Oh,
Yeah.
I guess protector is also being, what was it about Lord Ram? Oh, being
Oh,
true to
he
his
was.
promise. Yeah,
Oh, that.
we didn't
Yeah.
read the full thing about Lord Ram being
Yeah.
truthful. Um, okay, so well now we've moved on.
Yeah. That's a quality that the rulers had at that time. They would
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
they would rather die than go back on their word.
And that's exactly, yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Prabhupada
When
elaborates that out.
when the rulers would when they would give their word, they didn't go back on it.
Yeah,
That was.
so Lord Ram did that. Okay, and so now we've gone on to charitable and protection.
Yeah.
But let's get into the example of
Of
charity.
Shibi.
Yeah.
Okay, Maharaj Shibi, the king of Ushinara, was an intimate friend of Maharaj Yayati, who was able to reach the heavenly planets along with Maharaj Shibi. Maharaj Shibi was aware of the heavenly planet where he was to be transferred after his death, and the description of this heavenly planet is given in the Mahabharata. Maharaj Shibi was so charitably disposed that he wanted to give over his acquired position in the heavenly kingdom to Yayati, but he did not accept it. Yayati went to the heavenly planet along with the great rishis like Ashtaka and others. On inquiry from the rishis, Yayati gave an account of Shibi's pious acts when all of them were on the path to heaven.
Okay, let's just pause there, just to um, make sure we don't lose the thread here. Is that so? Shibi and Yayati, they were kind of friends, I guess,
Yeah, yeah,
and Shibi wanted to give everything to his friend Yayati, and Yayati didn't want to accept it. But he ended up ascending into like some kind of higher realm anyway, and he ended up narrating something about the life of Shibi. So now we're going to hear about Shibi, this great
okay.
charitable
I
personality.
see, I see.
Yeah.
Uh, so while he was on the earth, he became very famous as a protector of surrendered souls and a donor of charities. The king of heaven once took the shape of a pigeon hunter bird, eagle, and Agni, the fire god, took the shape of a pigeon. So you have an eagle and a pigeon.
Uh huh.
The pigeon, while being chased by the eagle, took shelter on the lap of Maharaj Shibi, and the hunter eagle wanted the pigeon back from the king. The king wanted to give it some other meat to eat and requested the bird not to kill the pigeon. The hunter bird refused to accept the king's offer, but it settled later on that the eagle would accept flesh from the body of the king of the pigeon's equivalent weight.
Okay. So the what was it? Agni and Indra.
Yes.
So he's taken a form of a. They want to test Shibi.
Yeah.
So Agni takes the form of a pigeon and Indra takes the form of an eagle, and then do this kind of like, so Indra starts chasing Agni like an eagle chasing the pigeon, and they go towards where Shibi is staying, and then Shibi sees this chase going on where the eagle's trying to, apparently looks like the eagle's trying to eat the pigeon, and the pigeon lands on Shibi's lap. So Agni lands on Shibi's lap. They know that he's very charitable, and they're trying to push the envelope. They want to actually see how far he's going to go in his charity. And so when the pigeon lands on Shibi's lap and the eagle says to the king, okay, like the eagle starts addressing the king, that, look, I want that, I want to eat that pigeon. So please give me the pigeon.
In charity.
But in charity, yeah, yeah. But the problem is that the pigeon has now sought protection from the king. So now you've got an ethical dilemma. An ethical dilemma is when you've got two ethics and they're both valid, but if you follow one, you can't follow the other. And so they've put him in an ethical dilemma. They've got like the pigeon who is has now asked protection from the king, but then the eagle has asked for charity from the king. And also the pigeon is you could say the rightful food of the eagle. So now he's stuck because he's being asked for charity and he has to give it, but he's being asked for protection and he has to give it. So they've kind of construed the situation just to see what he's going to do, right? And so in response, he says, okay, well, if you need to eat meat, I'm going to protect the pigeon, but I'll give you my flesh in equal weight to the pigeon. You can eat that. So that's already pretty impressive, right?
So then the king began to cut flesh from his body to weigh in the balance, equivalent to the weight of the pigeon. But the mystic pigeon always remained heavier. The king then put himself on the balance to equate with the pigeon, and the demigods were pleased with him. The king of heaven and the fire god disclosed their identity, and the king was blessed by them. Devarshi Narada also glorified Mars Shibi for his great achievements, specifically in charity and protection.
Yeah, so basically Shibi, because the pigeon would never be the same weight. Like, the idea was that he was going to cut off a piece of his flesh that weighed the same as the pigeon. Which is conceivable because how heavy is the pigeon going to be? But every time he put a piece of his flesh on the scale, the pigeon was always heavier, to the point where he's like, okay, I guess I just have to offer my life. I'll offer my whole body to protect a pigeon. Right. And he was like a very, very powerful king, protecting but he gave his duty was to protect. He was asked for protection. And so he decided to give it, and it meant giving his own life at the end of the day. And he decided to just offer his whole body to the eagle. And this is this quality of a kshatriya, right?
Yeah. I'd just like to say also that the application of spiritual philosophy for different roles can sometimes look slightly different, because he is the king, and so it's mentioned, I think in the previous commentary it was mentioned that the king is meant to protect the citizens, and the citizens at that time, he saw that all living entities in his kingdom were citizens. And we read in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says how the soul is within all living entities, and that a sage, a learned person sees that the same soul, or not exactly this, but the soul is within every living entity. And so even though the body may be different, spiritually there's equality. There's no difference between the soul in a human body and a soul in the body of an animal. They have the same spiritual potential. So for a king, his application of that is that he sees that there's souls within all these bodies, and I'm meant to protect all of them. So his application is like that, whereas the application of someone who's like, say, the Brahmins, for instance, or the business class or the laborer class, the application of that spiritual principle may look different than
Good
how the
point.
king applies it. But because his duty is to protect the citizens, then he sees them all equally, and this is one way how the king would apply that principle of protection. So yeah, I guess I find it quite fascinating that spiritual principles we can't necessarily expect and also judge a person on, like not everybody's going to apply that principle in this way, because it's not necessarily their duty to do that.
Right, right, right. And so if a person needed protection, there'd be a certain personality to go to get that protection,
Yeah,
because they'd be qualified to give it
yeah.
in this way.
And also, yeah, there's not many personalities that would actually do this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's why
But
he's the king.
if you've got an example of something, like, yeah, exactly, that's why he's the king, right? He's especially qualified. But if you've got like an extreme example of something good,
Right.
like when people try to when they try to what's the word, uh, they try to live that quality themselves, like, say I hear about it, so I may not be able to come to the standard of shibi, where I'm going to do that level of self-sacrifice, either because I haven't developed myself to that degree yet where I can even do that, think like that, or for whatever reason. But the point is that I'll do something. Like when I'm faced with a situation, and if I've got that as my role model, I'm going to make a decision that's towards that role model.
Yeah,
It
right.
won't necessarily be as perfect as my role model, but I'll be moving in that direction. And so when you've got those models in society, the idea is to move society towards developing these in our, because that's when our qualities are displayed, right? It's kind of like in our decision making process
Right.
when we decide to do this or that, and based on the situations we find ourselves in,
Yeah.
and how we decide to treat people.
Yeah. And yes, and also knowing like what's the proper cause, like like what's the when you're going to make that sacrifice, what are you making the sacrifice for, like what's
Yeah.
the ultimate cause. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
also the great personalities they show, like because lots of people in the world even today, they're making like great sacrifice to attain certain things, but you can see great personalities, the cause that they sacrifice for is generally a very noble cause. And as we see in the Bhagavatam, it's always a spiritual cause,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately.
The Bhagavatam is taking us much beyond Varnashram Dharma, like much beyond just organizing how we organize ourselves in
Yeah.
human society. And so it takes us, and actually more to the point here, Bhakti really helps us focus on the development of qualities and connection with divinity. And for that purpose, you don't really need to have society organized perfectly according to spiritual ideals. That a bhakti yogi, and the whole practice of bhakti yoga is is just developing these qualities in the situation where we find ourselves.
However,
Mhm.
it is very helpful.
It is very helpful. Yeah.
If this situation is a little more favorable,
Yes.
it can be very, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
So, and that's I mean, you read in Bhagavatam like in certain examples, like they gave the example of Ram, like it was a time in the world where developing bhakti, developing spiritual qualities, it was like a very um ideal time to do that, because the rest of society was like it was arranged in
Mm-hmm.
service to that higher principle.
Yeah. And we should endeavor to move towards that. And it's just that it's not a very quick process. And many of us will
Yeah.
probably live out our lives, like
Yeah.
living the dual thing, at least for some time. But in the meantime, those things become bridged internally, not externally.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can actually find ourselves in a situation where, okay, maybe like the work that I'm doing doesn't align perfectly with the exact mission of my life, or the ideals or causes that are most dear to my heart. But all that can be internal, that internal development, which is the most satisfaction comes from somehow understanding our relationship with divinity, and how we're meant to live in this world aware of that connection. And there's nothing that gives more happiness than that. Even if we're able to find some occupation that lines
Right.
up perfectly well, but we haven't developed that internal connection, and because then in that consciousness of being fully aware of our relationship with the divine, with Krishna, then there's like, that's where the happiness really starts to flow, right?
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
possible, but these are just still, it's certainly more favorable to put ourselves in better situations if we can. And here are qualities that we can focus on trying to develop,
Yeah.
um, that are all helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's not that we have to wait for a perfect situation in
Mm-hmm.
order to develop spiritually, in order for us to develop our life of bhakti. We don't need a perfect situation for that. And that's definitely a principle that's mentioned everywhere. Is like it's the development of our spiritual life is not dependent on material situations. And at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, there are material situations that are more favorable
Mm-hmm.
for spiritual life. And that's we read about that in the Bhagavatam.
Mm-hmm.
But I know one thing that Prabhupada would often say is that the material follows the spiritual. We have the Western conception is that spiritual comes from material in the sense that like at a certain combination of chemicals in the brain, then consciousness arises and the ideas about spirituality arise. So that's like the scientific, first there's matter and then everything else develops from matter. But the Bhagavatam, the Vedic concept is first there's spirit and everything. So if you change the if you develop spiritually, then naturally the world, your life is going to start following materially. It's going to follow materially in a way that's more in line and more supportive of your spiritual life. So when the consciousness changes, and that's also what Bhagavatam is meant for. We mentioned that the revolution in consciousness is that when people's consciousness change, when our consciousness changes, then naturally the world that we look outside, like if you change the consciousness of the leaders and the people in general, that no, economic development is not the goal of life, or enjoying our physical senses is not the goal of life, but actually spiritual development is the goal of life. And that's the real satisfaction. When that consciousness switches, then the world, can look very different as a result of the consciousness, the mentality. But it doesn't matter which leader you have, which person, if the goal is, economic development, doesn't matter who you put there, it's going to look the same because the
Mm-hmm.
consciousness hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
So when consciousness changes, then the externals. So
That's a great point.
yeah, just we were talking about how the matter and you don't need to wait for that perfect material situation. And
Yeah.
actually, the principle is that you have to change the spiritual situation, the consciousness, before the material situation is going to change.
Yeah, yeah, good point. So
Yeah.
the internal work has to happen, and then
Yeah.
naturally, the opportunities that we are presented with will start to change as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
or
the world outside will also, yeah.
yeah, it'll start to look different. Well, okay, that's good because I'm glad we ended there because I wasn't, like it's definitely a positive and affirming and empowering place to take this, right?
Hmm.
Instead of like lamenting how the world is or whatever, it's like the possibilities are there's no limit to the possibilities once we make that initial decision to work on the spiritual
Yeah.
element, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
after that, that's the main thing that needs to be switched out, right? Focusing, nothing wrong with economic development, but it's just like if the focus is our spiritual development, then it's like every next step is going to look different. It'll
Yeah.
transform in a way
Yeah.
that things are going to align a lot better in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
takes
No,
courage to do that.
it takes courage, and it's something that we can do. Every individual. It's not like we have to wait for any situation. It's not like we have to wait for anybody else. It's
Hmm.
like we can and do it, like ourselves. It's not there's many things in this world that, unless you're in the right situation, or have the right resources or whatnot, you can't necessarily pursue those things. But spiritual development is something that you can pursue.
Yeah.
It's that potential is always there. And when it is, the world outside will also change. So, we may not be able to affect the whole world or whatnot, but we can, by developing our spirituality, we can develop, or we can affect the world in which we live, the people in which we interact with, the environments in which we live. Like, we have we do have power, we have influence on ourselves, and on those that you know those we interact with, our environments. And I just it's spirituality, I find, is in Bhakti, is very empowering, because it's not dependent on, you know others. It's not dependent. It's like you can do something. You
Hmm.
can do something and have a profound effect.
That's a good place to end. I think we kind of ran out of time, and as we go on to the rest of this chapter, more qualities are going to be described and more personalities that embody these. Looks like the next one is Arjuna.
Yeah.
We can hear about Arjuna next time, and then who's after that? A few pages on Arjuna
Yeah.
and a few other personalities to come. Okay, that was good. Thanks, Brihat. That was very interesting to get to dig into that. We'll pick up next week.